Welcome back to The Watch, and I would like to talk a little bit about the infighting that's coming out on the right, concerns people have, my own thoughts on it, and why I actually don't think this is something to be too concerned about, because I have a different perspective. Some of you won't share that perspective, so that's fine, but perhaps you might understand where I'm coming from in regards to this. Now, some people think that this type of content is a bit out of the ordinary for Night's Watch, but Night's Watch, well, it has evolved to talk about and stay on watch for the things that are happening in the culture. Of course, primarily pop culture, that'll always be the mainstay, but also the creator kind of sphere on YouTube. We, did a whole video talking about when Lindsay Ellis left YouTube. Things that are significant to all of that. Absolutely. And so if you're here for the pop culture stuff, that's always going to be here. You don't have to watch this video if you're not interested, but those of you that are, thank you for watching. Recently, there's been a decent amount of infighting that has been happening amongst the right, and people are even saying, the right is starting to eat itself just like the left, and see, they're just no better than the left and everything. First of all, I don't like the boxes of right and left, because I know really good people who believe in more progressive socialist, social welfare policies and stuff like that. And of course, there are bad people who believe in conservative traditionalism and all those things. The way I more try and kind of define the groups in this culture war, and I do believe there is a culture war going on, and a very significant one, is more so, it seems like a division between people who are happy to disagree with others and not hate them for their disagreements, and were willing to live in peace and cooperation with people they disagree with, versus people who are truly intolerant and will not allow it. Okay, I think that's a vastly more accurate kind of description of the divisions between the crazy woke movement that's happening and the anti-woke movement. And that's the thing. That's why I think it's better to try and perhaps even frame it between woke and anti-woke versus left and right, because there are a lot of people on the left who hate this woke movement, okay? It's gone crazy. There's lots of people in the LGBT community that are totally not on board with this woke craziness. They're in our comment section and they support us as well. And so by just saying it's all the crazy left, I think it's probably more accurate to consider it crazy woke versus the anti-woke. And that's, like I said, more defined by people who are just willing to allow differences of opinion and they can get along with. I vehemently oppose abortion, and I will fight to try and get it outlawed, and the exceptions don't remove the norm. And I'm actually open to have discussions about exceptions for, if pregnancy is a result of something like incest or rape, or if the mother's life is legitimately physically at risk, not just because, my feelings and things, okay? I'm open to a discussion. That's not to say I think there should be an allowance, but those are the areas I'm willing to discuss, right? But even someone who supports abortion and think it's an absolute right and everything like that, I don't judge if they're a good or bad person based on their view on abortion. I think abortion is an evil thing, but I more judge people's goodness if they're going to help someone who falls down, if they're going to help an old lady across the street and will treat people with common decency and allow people to have their beliefs and freedom. That's a much better gauge. And so, of course, I have very close friends that have vastly different views and lifestyles than me, and we should try and push for a state, a world in which we can get along and live in peace. That would be the goal. Now, as to the infighting that's happening on the right, well, I say the right, I would say the anti-woke movement, okay? I don't think it's fair to equate this equivalently to the type of cancel culture that the left is the woke, I should say, the woke. And let's see, I've fallen into that. I can't even use those terms. And so I'm going to try and be more precise in my language, because there are people on the left who are against the woke movement as well. And so it's not the type of cancel culture that the woke movement is vastly more, inclined to do. And if it is, we should be better. For this is the main defining difference that should exist. We should support the good that people do, okay? There have been things getting exposed of Daily Wire and Tim Pool, and like in terms of the bigger ones, the first more prominent one that crossed my radar in terms of this conflict in the anti-woke movement was Lauren Southern actually calling out Milo, Faith Goldie, and Paul Joseph Watson, and she had some pretty eye-opening things to say, and it seemed very sincere from her behalf. It did feel like she was being honest with that. And my goodness, the actions of Milo, Faith Goldie, and Paul Joseph Watson, there were some receipts given, and then I'm personally always reluctant unless it's proven exactly, and it was a while ago I watched it, but. Okay, so the first one anyway, Lauren Southern, she exposed that. Then, of course, there was the Stephen Crowder versus the Daily Wire. And I sided with Stephen Crowder in that whole thing. I thought the terms agreement that they were trying to get Crowder to sign, or they offered him, but they would have accepted, would become a contract if the person they would negotiate. I think that was dirty, but anyway, I sided with Crowder, but it was Crowder, Daily Wire. Then we have the Quartering versus Tim Pool, James O'Keefe versus Project Veritas, and now Sydney Watson versus The Blaze and Elijah Schaefer. So there's a lot of kind of infighting happening lately. Thing that we should practice to hold to our principles better than the insane woke movement is to still support the people that are doing good things. And if I'll still support the Daily Wire when they do good things, okay? And the Daily Wire has done very good things that I think are very important, like the documentary What is a Woman? Really important stuff. Same with Tim Pool. I've withdrawn my support from him. I was a member and I've taken that away. But if he does good things, he can re-earn my trust. We should never write off someone completely and forget one of the most important principles of true virtue, and one of the core things of Christianity. And Christianity does seem to fall on the anti-woke side more than the woke, but it's not universal. But the principles of forgiveness should be ever present in our mind, and we should never believe anyone is beyond redemption, except for perhaps the most extreme cases. Though it is very interesting to kind of consider how extreme, okay? To what levels is someone truly beyond redemption? I wrote an entire novel exploring those themes, okay? To what level is someone truly beyond redemption? And hey, I don't shill my stuff enough. I suppose I shill it now. I have a novel, Chronicles of Everfall, Shadow of the Conqueror, where the protagonist is the former tyrannical emperor of a fantasy world. He was the Hitler and Stalin of this world, who actually comes to realization that he was evil, like horribly evil, and knows truly how bad he was, and he goes on a journey towards redemption. And the question, and then he gets essentially superpowers. And I had a lot of fun discussing that kind of philosophy, like about forgiveness and how important it is. And we should remember that just as good people, not just as Christians, just as good people, and how important forgiveness is, and that because we're all imperfect, we really are. And everyone is going to be making mistakes. And even though I'm calling out people for their mistakes, doesn't mean that they shouldn't be beyond forgiveness, redemption, and that we shouldn't be willing to support them when they do good things. And I think they'll go on to do good things. And that's going to be it should be the most defining difference between the anti-woke and the woke, okay? Like, if we are going to call people out for their bad things, we should always still be willing to support them when they do good things. You'll notice that in the insane woke movement, they don't do that. All right? If you step out of line, even the smallest fraction from the strict orthodoxy that you must follow, you are insane. And we saw that with the whole Hogwarts Legacy and J.K. Rowling situation recently. It's amazing. J.K. Rowling is such a woke person, such a far lefty in this, because he does support very left kind of leaning policies and things in almost everything except one thing. And it's this one thing that has made her the worst person in the world. It's crazy. And so if you transgress the woke movement by one, thing, you are excommunicated and a complete pariah. And if anyone supports it anyway, you are, contributing to the, the death of people and oppression. Oh, it's insane. That's the difference. One thing, written off completely, you're beyond redemption. People will do bad things on the anti-woke movement, the more traditional conservative side of things. But we shouldn't write them off completely, okay? If they do good things, we should support them. So that's the first thing I think that needs to be acknowledged about the infighting on the right. The next thing, people are saying that the infighting on the right is a bad thing and it's going to harm the movement. And I do have a bit of a different philosophy in regards to this. And so when I say it's a good thing, you might need to understand my philosophy that leads me to that, because if you don't share that philosophy, then it would be a bad thing for you, and I understand that. But when I say it's a good thing, before I get to my philosophy, it's a very good thing that we should not let the most prominent people who are pushing back against this woke movement cheat. Like, sometimes it's very overt fraud, but sometimes it's they're not as being as honest as they should, and it's kind of a softer type of thing. But if they are lying or cheating or getting away with anything, that should be called out. And just because they are on our side, and it might harm the movement overall, like if you allow immoral, unethical things just because they're on your side, oh boy, that's a slippery slope. Okay, that is you saying the ends justify the means. It's okay to allow some immoral things, some lying, everything, because it gets the effect that we want. And that means you're not actually driven by principle, you're driven by winning, which is very unprincipled, and it will be a slippery slope that leads to vastly worse things. And so absolutely, we should call out even people on our side for doing the wrong thing. And also the type of things that's being called out in all the examples I gave, like look at Lauren Southern versus Milo, Faith Goldley, Paul Joseph Hodgson, Crowder versus Daily Wire, Quartering versus Tim Pool. The other two, James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, Sydney Watson versus The Blaze, I don't have enough information to be able to see how valid these conflicts are, but the ones beforehand, I'm really glad these things have come to light, because things like this should be called out, and people should be held to account and held to their standards. And I think this is different to the things, that type of stuff people get called out of in the woke movement, because a lot of them, well, I guess it depends on, to me, it's like, feels very inconsequential. Oh, look, J.K. Rowling, she defines, women to be women and men as men. Doesn't seem like a controversial take, but it's like an apocalypse for other people. Where it feels like the type of conflicts, at least the ones that I've already mentioned that we know the context of, they seem to be important things to be called out on. And these type of things that's being called out on in the conservative movement, the anti-woke movement, right, are the types of things that the woke movement, all right, so sometimes I say I'll say insane leftist movement, and this means I'm not referring to moderate leftists, the insane leftists, right? But I guess I'm falling into the same thing. But I don't know, exact terminology and definitions, and sometimes just in casual language to refer to. I'll do what I can. Okay, so it seems like the things that's being called out in the conservative space, the anti-woke space, are the type of things in the woke movement that they are more than happy to let slide. There's been the more prominent people on the woke side of things that said, "Oh yeah, we'll lie because winning is important. It's I'll lie, I'll," and they will excuse some horrid things, really bad things, just because they're on their side, and they don't think it's against their movement and stuff, and the honesty does not seem to be a very something that the woke movement values too much, because they lie through their teeth so often. And it seems like honesty is something that gets called out in the conservative, the anti-woke movement, quite a lot, and I'm all for that. Absolutely, honesty should be another gold standard principle we should expect from the prominent thought leaders of the movement. The movement, I don't know why I don't like calling it a movement, because I think that there's certainly a woke movement, so the anti-woke movement, because I don't think it's as organized as the woke movement, and people might say that's a failing. I'm not so certain it's necessarily a failing if the anti-woke movement isn't as organized, because it's people pushing back because they see the insanity in the world, and they don't need leaders or organizations to prompt them to do that. Which means if the leaders and everything fall or are exposed to not being the best types of people, if it's unorganized, the pushback will still happen. And the other side of this is that I don't think a movement should necessarily be defined by its leaders. I say necessarily because it's interesting. For instance, feminism, right? There are a lot of people who call themselves feminists, and they are unaware of what the thought leaders and most prominent spokespeople for feminism is saying. And when I share some of what, Anita Sarkeesian and some of the most prominent spokespeople for feminism say, well, the people who claim to be feminists, that's not true feminism, everything like that, but these are the most prominent people, right? And so if you're allowing the most prominent people define what your ideology believes, okay, the leaders are important. I actually see, in terms of the conservative side of things, the anti-woke side, they call out the leaders very quickly when they start to misrepresent the values and things that we stand for. And I am lockstep in that. I will call out the most prominent people if they start to try and represent the things that we're striving for incorrectly. Like, for instance, if they start to not support free speech. I guess you could try and say there is equivalences when someone, a feminist spokesperson says something truly anti-feminist, but I didn't see enough call-outs to the feminists, thought leaders. I did not see nearly enough call-outs from most feminists when they say kill all men or, all men are evil, some really drastically bad things. If the thought leaders of that movement are not being defined by the leaders, then why isn't the movement, the people inside, calling out the bullcrap as actively as we see in the conservative anti-woke movement? And the fact that I see the people inside the movement willing to call out the bullcrap so readily, like it isn't just the quartering, having an issue with Tim, or I know they buried the hatchet, right? But and the same thing, it wasn't so much the Crowder calling out the Daily Wire as the people, who are part of the kind of conservative thing that also spoke up against it. Tim was getting flamed in his chat by his viewers, more so than what the quartering was doing, okay? And it seems like if the movement, the people inside, they're the ones who are more willing to hold the leaders to account, which makes me feel the leaders aren't nearly as important. And also, the success in pushing back against the woke movement is not going to be achieved by the most prominent people in it. It's going to be achieved by the individuals, the parents, pushing back against what's being taught in their schools, okay? It's going to be pushed back by the fans who do not go and watch the most recent Marvel slop. Okay, it's going to take all the people, if they're in the movement, right, doing that to win, not having the leaders, most prominent people be successful. They can fail, their businesses can go under, and I feel the anti-woke kind of pushback will still be in place because it's a pushback against insanity, and that will keep going. And so that's the first part of why I don't think it's a bad thing that the more prominent people are some of them getting attacked and getting called out for their things. And I don't think it's necessarily harming the movement, especially if this is a means to get more honest, more ethical, people to rise to the top to be the most prominent voices of the anti-woke movement, the more conservative thing, and it shouldn't necessarily be defined by just conservatism, just like, the whole left-right thing, but it seems to be a more conservative kind of thing, and I certainly fall in. I think it's most accurate to define me as a conservative, even though there's certain social welfare things that I support, all right? I'm not, falling into a complete box. I have to acknowledge that the social health system in Australia works really good. I'm against overtaxation and the means, the socialist kind of policies that try and lead to the social welfare. But I think that could be supported through free market and capitalism and stuff. But anyway, like I said, I don't fall into a box either. But I do more define myself as a conservative. So I'm just trying to add some nuance when I do slip and say conservative, left and right and everything. I hope you can understand that I am aware of the nuance that people don't so easily fall into these boxes. So the movement, I don't think, is going to be harmed by this. And I like seeing crap called out, and I like seeing everyone in the movement holding the prominent people, thought leaders, to account. And I'll be part of that. That's why I commented on this Stephen Crowder versus Daily Wire, the Tim Pool quartering stuff, because I want to hold them to account as well. And if there's gonna be anything unethical or dodgy or anything, just because they're on my side, doesn't mean I won't call out crap when I see it. And this comes into the other philosophy of why I think it's really good that the infighting in the right is happening, because I see people standing on principle. And ultimately, please understand, let me explain it. I've explained it a couple in other videos, so you might hear some of the explanation of what I'm saying here. Ultimately, I don't care if we lose. And you might be thinking, oh, what? Because it shouldn't be about winning and losing. It should be about doing what's right. That's the most important thing. And if you just think about winning is the only thing, then you're far more likely to accept unprincipled behavior for the sake of winning, which is the very thing we see in this woke movement, that they're willing to do some really dodgy, bad, and dishonest things because it supports them. It helps what they want to push, which ultimately shows one side as being wholly very unprincipled, and the side that I support, I want to support the principled side. And as a result, then, we should stand on principle, not for winning. And it comes into, my religious belief as well. I don't think winning the culture war, overcoming the woke thing, is going to make my life be a success. The way that I will define my life to be success is how good a life I lived, how principled I lived, and how righteously I lived. And this is also informed by the faith that I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And even if the fight is hopeless, I believe you should still stand on your principles and fight for what is right, even if you know you're going to lose. I'm not saying we know we're going to lose the this thing, the pushback against the woke. But from my own religious perspective, I personally see this as signs of the times. And if prophecy is anything to go off in terms of the second coming of Jesus Christ, it's only going to be getting worse. If we do win, great. That'll be great. I'll be fighting for it. I'm doing my part, right? But even if we don't, and I kind of believe that it's just going to get worse, I'll still fight for what's right, because it's not about winning. It's about doing the right thing. It's actually my faith that has taught me this principle, that even if the battle is ultimately hopeless, you should still fight in it. And this actually comes from one of the accounts in the Book of Mormon. If you will permit me, just let me share it with you, because this is important to me, and this is what taught me this principle. It's a good, important principle. And the context of this is that Mormon, the man who abridged the record of the Nephites into the Book of Mormon, that's why it's called after him, his people, the Nephites, have fallen into complete evil and wickedness, and they're a lost cause, and they're just beyond redemption because they just are not listening to him. And he says this to his son about the situation. For so exceedingly do they anger, that it seemeth me that they have no fear of death, and they have lost their love one towards another, and they thirst after blood and revenge continually. And now, my beloved son, notwithstanding the hardness, let us labour diligently. For if we should cease to labour, we should be brought under condemnation. For we have a labour to perform whilst in this tabernacle of clay, that we may conquer the enemy of all righteousness and rest our souls in the kingdom of God. And what it's saying here is that we have a labour to perform, even if it's not going to result in winning in the end. There are still duties that we need to fulfill, and part of those duties is doing the right thing. Okay? And so I actually believe, because this is signs of the times, that prophecies is that things are going to get much, much worse. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to push back and do my part and fight against it. And if it turns out that the second coming of Christ is going to be a bit later down the track and we win against that, great, brilliant, and I'm glad I fought against it. Because it's not about winning. It's about doing the right thing. This is why it's also important to try and make the world a better place, even if you think your part isn't going to have a great impact at the end of things. This is why I'll always vote, okay? we do live in countries that are much freer than other countries, and there are far better systems in place now. I'm not saying they're perfect by any means, but there are far better systems in place than other places in the world where we do have some measure or something that we can do to try and push for a better world by trying to vote for those people who will support the things that we want them to support. And even if it's a lost cause, that you're in an area where your vote would never sway it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't still do your part and just act on principle. Okay? So you should still vote and try and work with the system that is in place to make the world a better place, even if it's a lost cause. And in the larger scheme of things, against this woke movement, I don't care if they win, I don't care if we lose, and even if that means calling out people on our side for their bad behavior, if it harms the movement, no, there's a principle to be stood up for, and we should not allow the people who are the most prominent voices to get away with any type of unethical behavior. And that's ultimately where I see this kind of thing, the infighting, because this is the other thing, okay? Even if, like, the movement seems to be harmed, if there's less support for the Daily Wire, for Tim, and for these, outspoken thought leaders, for lack of a better word, right? If they lose their business and are less successful, other people will come up and fill their role, okay? There are so many people trying to push back against this insanity that's happening in the world. And there's a lot of people making videos, okay? And I don't make videos like Tim. I don't cover the news so regularly like him. I wouldn't be a replacement for Tim. But if you don't want to support Tim based on what he's done, and he has been dishonest, support the good that he does in the future, and find people that are doing the things that Tim is doing and support them. And there are lots of people making videos covering the news like that, and you can support them. And if not, are you able to do it? There's nothing stopping you, okay? Because more people should be outspoken against what's going on. And there will always be people who will rise to the surface and fill the roles that need to be filled. And don't worry about, losing business for, the people. Like, if we are, deigned to win, if it's, because I do believe what the Lord wants to happen as things transpire will happen. I trust him in this, okay? And so if he wants strong leaders to be able to lead the anti-woke movement, he'll see that the right people end up in there. And even if you don't believe in God, the best people will rise to the surface, okay? Don't think that they're irreplaceable or that they're so special that we need them, okay? And look, Tim is an interesting example because he's one of the hardest workers I've ever seen. And I think that's a more unique characteristic of him that's helped him become as successful as he is. But there's other people, not me. I'm not nearly as hardworking as him. But there are other, I guess it's a matter of perspective and what you do. I don't make as many videos, but I do. Anyway, there are other people who will work hard enough, I guess, to be able to have prominent videos and be a voice and have a platform to get people seen and everything. And so I don't think you need to stress too much about it, and don't be reluctant to stand on principle. And at the end of the day, this is why, I see the so-called infighting. I don't think it's a sign of the conservative anti-woke movement being as bad. Nowhere near. In actual fact, I see it signs that we're still, when I say so, yes, much better and far more principled than the woke movement, because a lot of these we had to see about James O'Keefe and Sidney Watson and stuff. But so far, a lot of this type of infighting is people standing on principle. And that's a good thing. So that's what I wanted to share in regards to those are my thoughts. I appreciate you for watching, and as always, stay on watch.